I told Vasquez at 06:30. I'd been planning well, to do it gently, had rehearsed something reasonable on the walk to the chow line, a measured delivery, facts only, no editorializing. I'm an intelligence officer. Information management is, theoretically, my entire professional identity. What actually came TBH out was, the woman from the bar runs our targeting packages. Vasquez had a forkful of powdered eggs halfway to his mouth. It stayed there. Plus, all of them, I said. You know, near 6 months. Every clean package we've ever gotten. That's her. The fork didn't move. She's a like Lieutenant Colonel, I said. J2 Director. Basically the TBH, reason this task force has an operational record worth discussing. Vasquez put the fork down. Very carefully, and for what it's worth, in my opinion, like it had done something to offend him. The one I spilled beer on, yes. And then laughed. You laughed. Hewitt laughed. Brant made that sound he makes. Silence. The generator outside, you know, was doing its morning coughing routine. Somebody's radio was playing something staticky that might have been music. The powdered eggs steamed quietly, disinterested in the collapse happening at our table. How bad is it? Vasquez said. I don't know honestly yet, I said, and which was honest. I genuinely did not know yet. What I knew was that Lieutenant Colonel Voss had filed a new targeting package at 0047, en route, beer-stained, and the package was thorough and precise, and gave zero indication that the previous evening had happened to her in any meaningful sense. That was either reassuring or the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen, and I'd decided which. Brant arrived at the table, set down his tray, and looked at Vasquez's face. What happened? Brant said. I, for what it's worth, told him. Brant sat down very slowly. And he had the look of a man calculating the distance between his current location and a career-ending paperwork event. She pretty much know who where, he said. She built, I guess, the intelligence architecture that keeps us alive, I said. She knows everything. Brant stared at his food for a moment. I made that sound, he said. You did. Look. What sound? Vasquez said. I guess, the sound, I said. Brant nodded, heavily, like a man accepting a sentence. Well, the operations briefing was at 0800, plus standard format, current threat assessment, upcoming operational windows, logistics, personnel rotation. Colonel Hargrove ran it, seated at the head of the table with his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a cup of actual ground coffee that he never shared with anyone. I'd my notebook open, which Vasquez was at the far end of the table, posture perfect, expression that of a man attending his own tribunal. Lieutenant Colonel Voss walked TBH in at 0758, different clothes. No evidence of last night except a small stain on the cuff of her left sleeve that she'd clearly noticed and clearly decided not to prioritize. She had a tablet and a folder and the topographic maps, new ones, printed fresh from the field station. She moved to the empty chair 2 seats from Hargrove without ceremony, without announcement, without any acknowledgement that the room had changed temperature when she entered it. Hargrove looked up and, Mara, I didn't know you were still in sector. Transit got pushed, she said. Wanted, I guess, to walk the 72-hour package before I left. Good timing. He gestured around the table. You know most of these. Her eyes moved across the room the way a LiDAR scan moves, efficient, total, non-performative. She looked at, me, for approximately 1 second. Moved on. Looked at Vasquez for approximately 1 second. Plus, nothing in her face. Nothing. Plus, Vasquez had the look of a man sincerely hoping the building would catch fire. She briefed the package herself, and standing. No notes. I've sat through a lot of intelligence briefings. The good ones feel like being handed a set of keys. You understand afterward exactly what doors open and how. The great ones are rarer, the ones where the presenter has so completely internalized the operational picture that they're not presenting at you. They're thinking alongside you, and you come out the other side having thought things you didn't know you could think. This was a great one. She started with terrain, not the standard satellite image and overlay approach, but a reconstruction of how the terrain had changed over. 14 months, feature well by feature, showing where vehicle tracks had worn new paths, where temporary structures had become semi-permanent, where the pattern of movement had evolved. She'd been tracking it across 6 rotations of 3 different units, cross-referencing, signals intelligence with pattern of life analysis, and 2 human intelligence threads that she described only in the aggregate, protecting sources even in a classified room. The objective, a logistics node that had been enabling materiel transit through the corridor, hadn't been static. It had been migrating in small increments, adjusting, adapting. Pretty much, she'd tracked the adaptation. And had predicted the next shift. Had built, in my opinion, the 72-hour window around the predicted position, not the current one. If we hit current position, she said without inflection, we hit empty infrastructure. 2 weeks delay for what it's worth, minimum, while they reestablish if we hit this position, she indicated. The map, a location roughly 3 kilometers east of the current site. We catch the transition. The node, I think, the for what it's worth, personnel managing it, and the transit element they're expecting. Hargrove. Confidence level? 83% on the position, 91% on the personnel, which the transit element is the variable. She paused. Though I'd take those odds. Hargrove looked around the table. Nobody had questions, not because there weren't any, but because she'd done the unusual thing of actually answering them all in advance, which meant the questions you'd prepared felt embarrassing to ask. I guess I was writing fast. My notebook had been open the whole briefing, and I'd filled 3 pages without realizing it. Vasquez was very still, and she was done in 40 minutes. I mean, sat back down. Plus, the briefing actually moved on to logistics and personnel rotation and the attendant administrative suffering of running a task force in a location that officially didn't appear in budget line items. At look, 0912, Hargrove ended the meeting, which people gathered papers. He started the hallway conversations that can't happen in a recorded room. I closed my notebook. Lieutenant Voss was talking to Hargrove about transit timing, unhurried, finishing a thought. Vasquez appeared at my elbow, and plus, I'm going to apologize to her, he said. I know, I said. And is that going to make it worse? I thought about the quality of her stillness, the 0 energy she'd allocated to him in the bar. Pretty much, the 0047 filing time, and the look, face that did nothing. Don, I don't think I mean it's going to make anything, I said. I don't think you register. Vasquez considered this for a moment. That's somehow worse, he said. Yeah, I said, which he went anyway. Because Vasquez was, underneath the everything else, a man who, when he'd done a wrong thing, needed to say so. It was genuinely one of the better things about him, sandwiched between all the worse things. I sort of watched from the doorway. He stopped a respectful distance. From her. Waited until she'd finished with Hargrove. I think, said something quiet, and I couldn't hear it, which she listened. Her, I guess. Face did a small thing, not warm, not cold, something more measured, the expression. Of a person who has heard many apologies and developed a precise rubric for evaluating them. She said something back. Vasquez nodded. Once. She picked up her maps and her tablet and walked out of the operations center into the white morning light, and that was that. And Vasquez came back, which... What did she say? I asked. He was quiet, I think, for a second. Said, well, she'd forgotten about it before she hit the door. I looked at him. That's not a compliment, he said. No, I said, and it's not. She was gone by 1100. Transport had been reshuffled, and she was on a vehicle heading to the next FOB, 2 hours east. Now, where presumably another room full of soldiers had no idea who was about to walk in and sit down and reconstruct their operational picture from the ground up with 83% confidence and 40 minutes of standing time. I stood outside the operations center drinking the Okafor coffee. I'd given up on finding it palatable. It was purely mechanical at this, I think, point, fuel in, cognition out, and watched the transport vehicle kick up dust on the track heading east. And the dust, for what it's worth, took a long time to settle. The operation ran 71 hours later. Night assault, mechanized element plus our ranger attachment, the 3 guys from the bar included. I wasn't on, the ground. My job was back at the operations center, running signals intercept in real time, feeding Hargrove anything that broke loose. It went clean. Cleaner than it had any right to go. Operationally speaking, the kind of clean that comes when the intelligence is so precise that the ground element spends the whole assault feeling like they're moving through a story someone already finished writing. Objective hit at the predicted position. Personnel present and transit element arriving 14 minutes into the assault caught mid-approach, which was either luck or the 91% talking. I was logging in real time. Have the whole thing in 3 notebooks, filed in chronological order, with the signals timestamps cross-referenced against the ground element's comms. At 0341, Hargrove said from across the room, she called it. Nobody specified who she was. Well, nobody needed to. I thought about that afterward. About the specifics of what it means to be right from a distance, invisibly, in ways that nobody connects to you in the moment because you're not there and there's nobody to point at you and say this person made this possible. And about the particular, actually, professional condition of being the architecture that a structure stands on. Essential, load-bearing, invisible by design. Had she ever stood in an operations center and heard she called it? I guess I didn't know. Probably not in those rooms, in those moments. Maybe in other rooms later, in the aggregate, in assessment reports and performance reviews, and the quiet career math that happens above the level of individual operations. Yeah, maybe the fuel depot bar was a more regular occurrence than one Thursday night. The transient expert passing through rooms full of people who didn't know what they were looking at, dismissed, overlooked, unrecognized, continuing to work. I added a note to my log at 0356, post-operation, while the adrenaline was still making my handwriting worse than usual. The transport vehicle went east. I guess probably another FOB, probably another room. Probably nobody there knows either. Vasquez actually said she'd forgotten about it before she hit the door. Don't think that's true. I think she decided it wasn't worth the space. There's a difference. The difference matters. Wichtal, one of the Rangers, I finally learned his name was Specialist Yates, found me at the after-action debrief 2 days later and asked who had built the targeting package. I told him, sort of, watched it land. He had the same reaction Vasquez had had. The fork stopping. At the recalibrating. The looking back at the previous night with fresh and basically awful context. She was at the bar, he said. She was at the bar. Yes. He was quiet for a long moment. Does she know it was us? She knows exactly who you're, I said. She's been running your unit's operational support for 6 months. Another silence. Outside, the generator was at it again, which the dog was barking again, same direction as before, 3 kilometers east. Nothing or everything. What do we do with that? Yates said. It wasn't really a question, but I answered it anyway. You use the next package she sends, I said, and the one after that, and you come home because she was right about the window. He thought about it. That's it? That's the whole job, I said. The third SOTF completed its rotation 4 months later. In the after-action records, declassified eventually. In the versions that see daylight, there's a line item crediting the operational success rate of the rotation to reliable and accurate intelligence support from the J2 Directorate. Lieutenant Colonel Mara Voss isn't named, which her name appears, if you know how to read the routing headers, in 47 targeting packages filed over the rotation. Most of them at odd hours. Several filed during transit. One filed at TBH 0047 on a Thursday from a vehicle heading east through the dark. I've that one in my log. I kept all 47.